Welcome to the Weekly Roar, coming live from the Lion's Den, helping new managers become great leaders and awesome bosses. And now, here's your host, Greg Storch.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome to the Weekly Roar! Thanks for coming back to the Lion's Den for this week's watch party. I am super pumped right now because tomorrow morning I'm boarding a plane in Venice to start making my way to Orlando for the International Maxwell Leadership Conference. Man, if you think I'm full of energy now, wait till I get back next week. Before I take off, it's time again to talk about another concept in the foundations of leadership. But before I jump into today's topic, let me introduce myself for those of you who might be watching for the first time. I'm Greg Storch, and I'm the founder of Lion Enterprise, a leadership development and coaching business where I'm placing my focus on helping organizations develop positive work cultures. I'm a certified professional leadership coach and also a certified speaker and trainer. Okay, now that we've gotten that out of the way, did you join me for the Weekly Roar last Wednesday? I continued my series called Follow the Leader, Concepts and the Foundations of Leadership. Last week's topic was about why good leaders never confuse action with progress and the importance of prioritization regardless of where your leadership role falls in the organization. Whether you're leading a company, a church, a baseball team, whatever, good leaders know that they always have to put the first things first. Hey, if you didn't make it into the Lion's Den for the Weekly Roar last week to get your priorities straight, see what I did there? It's all good. All you have to do is jump over to my website at www.lion-enterprise.com. Click up on the Lion's Pride library at the top of the homepage, and you'll see all of my videos there. Last week's video is number 67, and it's a great way for you to get more of the roar. So this week, I'm talking about the price that we pay to assume the leadership role and how the price continues to increase as we move up the leadership ladder. I really love this concept because I have experienced this in my own careers, both in the Navy and in the private industry. As leaders, we sacrifice plenty to be where we are, and trust me on this. As leaders, we sacrifice plenty to be where we are. And trust me on this, if you think into this hard enough, you will quickly realize just how much you've had to give up in order to move up. I can't wait to get started. So without further ado, let's get this party started, y'all. As I was preparing for this discussion today, I took some time to reflect on my own past. From a very early age, I always held leadership positions. It started back in high school when I was co-captain of our cross-country team. And really, it's continued over the past, almost 40 years now. Anyone who takes on a leadership role does so for any number of reasons. There's probably as many reasons for doing it as there are positions of leadership themselves. But regardless of the reason why you took the helm or grew into your leadership role, there is one constant that we all experience. We all experience having to give something up in order to keep moving up. There's always a sacrifice to be made, and the higher we climb, the greater the sacrifice becomes. If you're currently in a leadership position, any position, whether it's within a company, in your church, in your community, or even within your own family, I want you to just take a minute to stop and reflect. ask yourself, what have I given up? What sacrifices have I had to make in order to be where I am today? You'll probably come to the realization that because I took this leadership role, I no longer have the luxury to fill in the blank. Just a few weeks ago, I spoke about Nelson Mandela and the sacrifices he made as he rose to become president of South Africa. I know this is a pretty extreme example, but it makes my point. Mandela sacrificed his freedom for 27 years before his rise into political power. And earlier in his life, as he was rising to power, he was repeatedly arrested and was unsuccessfully prosecuted. So you get the idea. And by the way, the greater the leader, the more they give up. If you haven't learned this yet or experienced this for yourself, there's one thing I want to share with you. And it's that the heart of leadership is our ability to give up so we can move up. It's really about our ability to make the sacrifices needed in order to lead. Growing up in Daytona Beach, Florida, meant a lot of things. One of them was being exposed to a TV commercial for Stanley Hannon, the owner of Allied Discount Tires. Stanley used his friend Sam Baer as the front man in these these things were done in the 80s, so you can use your imagination. But these commercials became a mainstay for anyone in the Central Florida region, and it became known as the Tires Ain't Pretty campaign. If you're from Florida, you might know what I'm talking about. So in this 30-second spot on TV, Sam would pop up in front of a backdrop of the store and say, "Tires ain't pretty. They don't make you look no better, but everybody needs them." Now, the reason I'm telling you about this silly commercial is because whenever I think of leadership, I think of that commercial. Leadership ain't pretty. It don't make you look no better, but everybody needs it. Lots of people who aren't in leadership positions seem to have this common misperception about leadership. They see all the glitz and glamour of these large payout bonuses and perks of the position, the helicopters, the yachts, the large paychecks. Sometimes that is what drives people into those positions to start with. But the reality of leadership is that it takes sacrifice. You have to give up if you want to go up. So if you want to become the best leader you can be, you'll have to be ready to give up some things. You'll have to make sacrifices if you want to lead well. And if you're ready to do that, then here are some things that you'll need to know. You may know this already, but I feel like it needs to be said anyway. But if you ever want to experience success, you'll have to make sacrifices to do it. And that's just general in life. No matter what you're doing, if you want to be successful at it, you'll have to trade something to get it. Think about it. Parents make sacrifices all the time to raise their children. Athletes give things up in order to become the best they can be in their chosen sports. Even people who choose professional careers that require tons of schooling, like lawyers or doctors or engineers, they all trade something for another. I read this quote once that said, "If you aren't willing to sacrifice for the things you want, then the things you want will become the sacrifice." One way or another, you have to give up to go up. I know you all can probably think of a ton of things that you've sacrificed in order to get where you wanted to be? I'd love to hear what you come up with. Please comment below. Share something you gave up in order to move up. So the other thing I want to mention is that even though we all have to give things up to get what we want, when it comes to leadership, you can expect that you'll have to sacrifice more than others. Good leaders put others before themselves. They're selfless and they focus on what's best for the team. The minute that you decide to take responsibility for others, you can start to experience limitations on what you can do. Why? Because the more responsibility you have, the less options you're given. And leaders have to be willing to do that. They have to be ready to give up more than the people who are following them. Not every leader gives up the same things as they ascend the leadership ladder. It differs from leader to leader. But whatever it is you're giving up, the premise doesn't change. You will sacrifice. Maybe it's one thing or maybe it's many things, but it will be something. You know, it's probably easier early in our careers to give things up to get where we want to go. But the thing is that giving things up to get what we want never goes away. You have to keep giving up if you want to stay up. I remember when I applied for a program in the Navy that would allow me to get my master's degree while I was still on active duty, and the Navy would pay for it. I knew that if I wanted to successfully promote to my next rank, I would need to have that degree. So I applied and I got accepted to the program. Now you're probably thinking, so what exactly did you have to give up? Sounds like the Navy gave you a free ride for a graduate degree. Well, that's kind of true. But what I didn't tell you was that I was living in San Diego at the time I applied for the program, and the program was at the University of Pittsburgh. That's right, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Not only did I have to give up the perfect weather of San Diego to obtain my master's degree, but my kids lived there with their mother in San Diego. So I would have to sacrifice my current visitation schedule as well if I was going to advance in my military career. There were a lot of trade-offs I made in that particular instance, but I got my graduate degree without incurring any student debt, and I was eventually promoted to my next rank because of it. The thing is, I continued to make sacrifices for the rest of my military career, and that didn't stop when I started working in the private industry. The problem for leaders comes from them thinking that they no longer have to sacrifice anything. Leadership is like revolving credit for sacrifice. It's not like a loan that has a payoff date. You'll continually make payment for the responsibility of leadership in the form of sacrifice, and the loan will never be considered paid in full. Oh, wait. It doesn't stop there. And that's why sacrifice is really at the heart of leadership. I'm going to say that again. Sacrifice is really at the heart of leadership. It never really goes away. And as you climb that ladder of responsibility in your leadership role, the higher you go, the greater the sacrifice you'll have to make. The higher you go, the more it's going to cost you. I can think of two examples of this that I want to share with you today. The first is about the owner of the IT company that I used to work for. Now, over 20 years ago, She started out as a computer programmer who was helping some of the federal agencies get ready for the Y2K scare. Remember that? As she gained more work and her small company grew in its number of employees, she spent less time. She gave up time on the technical side, and she had to spend more time, of course, on the business side. At the time I was with the company, I saw the employee count rise from about 750 people to just under 2,000 people. I also saw a CEO who was now devoting almost every waking minute to that company. Weekends, evenings, you name it. She had given up hobbies and personal relationships as she grew her company. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of sacrifices she made that I'm not even aware of. But one thing I do know, and that is the higher you go up, the more it's going to cost you. It's like an auction. The person at the top pays the most. Second thing I was going to tell you about that kind of supports what I'm talking about in this concept was about the time when I retired from the Navy. My wife and I retired out of Naples, Italy, and we moved to South Carolina. We both got federal jobs at the Naval Hospital in Beaufort, which is located near Parris Island Marine Corps Base. That's the boot camp, one of the boot camps for the Marine Corps. It's where we bought our first custom-built home. About 2 years into that job, I was offered the IT position up in Washington, D.C. The position paid twice what I was making down in South Carolina, and it was a way bigger leadership position than the one I was filling at Naval Hospital. It definitely was a move up in my career from both a financial perspective as well as a leadership perspective. But in order to move up to that higher level of leadership, I had to make greater sacrifices. First of all, I had to resign from the federal service, which meant losing out on building that second retirement in the federal system. But to me, of even greater sacrifice was the fact that I only had 2 weeks to move up to the area and start working. And that meant I had to leave my wife behind in South Carolina to find renters for the house and to take care of other logistics. I lived in the basement of my wife's aunt's house for the first 6 months that I was up in the DC area. It wasn't until then that my wife was able to finally join me, and then we were able to get a place of our own much closer to where I work. Now, before I moved up there, I had been driving to work in South Carolina and could carpool with my wife since we both worked at the hospital. It only took us about 40 minutes one way. Now, staying with her aunt in DC forced me to give up that convenience. They lived way west of DC, and for the first 3 months, I didn't know how to get around, so I was driving on Route 66 to the metro station, and then I would metro into DC for work. I don't know if you know about Route 66 in that area of DC, but it's a nightmare. It's packed. That commute lasted for a good 2 hours one way. Then I finally learned how to use the train system. Now I needed to wake up a little earlier, and I would drive my car to the train. I would take the train to DC, and then I would take the metro into work. I did that for the last 3 months before my wife arrived up in DC. It was ridiculous, and the train schedule was extremely restrictive. So I had very few options. I had to get to work early in the morning because of the train schedule, and I would get home later in the evening because of it. All of these things were major sacrifices I made in order to move up. But I got to tell you, after almost 8 years in the DC area, I was extremely successful. I promoted 3 times in 4 years. My leadership positions were growing in responsibility, and the sacrifices I was making for each trade up became bigger and bigger. The one thing I learned from that experience is that we don't achieve success without making sacrifices. Look at anyone who has any level of success, and you will see a person who has made a sacrifice after sacrifice in order to get it. Now, I'm not telling you all this to make you rethink your leadership roles, like that would happen. I don't want to make it sound like leadership is hell. It's actually the exact opposite. But I'm just trying to level set expectations here. If you want to be a great leader, you'll have to be willing to give up to go up. Are you ready to make the sacrifices required in order to get where you want to go? Have you ever known someone saving up for that big vacation of a lifetime? They spend months, sometimes they even spend years making sacrifices to set aside the money they're going to need to pull it off. They sacrifice dinners out with friends and other nice to have things in the name of tightening their belts. And then the day finally arrives and they go on that vacation. And as soon as they return, their lives return to the way they were before vacation planning ever started and the sacrifices stopped. Well, it doesn't work that way when it comes to leadership. You can't make sacrifices, give things up for a certain amount of time and then get to take that vacation or enjoy that promotion. When it comes to leadership, the sacrifices never stop if you plan to continue to reach for the next level up. So remember these few things. At the center of leadership is a willingness by the leader to make the necessary sacrifices to lead. Without that willingness to give things up, success will not happen. And while everyone gives something up in order to get something else, when it comes to leadership, we're expected to give up even more than others. It never ends. Remember, you have to give up to go up and keep giving up to stay there. Okay, that is another concept in the foundations of leadership. It's time for me to go pack my bags and get ready for my trip. But before I take off, remember, leave your comments down below. Let me know what you think about today's weekly roar. I'd love to hear your stories about the sacrifices you've had to make in order to go up. Thanks so much, you guys, for tuning in again this week for another weekly roar. I appreciate your support. Remember, if you like this content, please share out the link to the weekly roar video. I'm going to post it here after the watch party. Now, remember, don't share the actual watch party link because once the watch party ends, it can't be viewed anymore. I'm going to be back here again next week, same place, same time, as I return back from Orlando, and I'll be speaking about yet another concept in the foundations of leadership. Next week, I'm going to talk to you about the importance on not only knowing where to go as a leader and what to do, but also why it's important to know exactly when the timing is right to do those things. It's kind of like two dancers performing a waltz. The dancers know what to do and where the steps will take them. But if their timing is off, the dance is not going to look anything like a waltz at all. It will be a complete disaster. All right, you guys, I'm off to Orlando now. Until we meet again next week, please remember, be powerful, but stay poised just like a lion. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for watching the Weekly Roar live event at lionenterprise.com. If you enjoyed this video, please tell others to join us each week here in the Lion's Den. Thanks again, and see you next week.